Hey guys, this is Courtney Colley, Brittany Hibbensteel,
Dr. David,
and you're listening to Darker with Daniel.
This week we have David. David is a pharmaceutical chemist. And David, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do. Or
tell us about your journey.
Sure. First, I want to say thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
I really appreciate the invite. It's been really fun getting to meet all y'all, and it's nice to get a chance to, maybe shed some light on things I've done or just in general in the science. But right, so I am a synthetic organic chemist is my trade. That's what I got my degree in.
Sounds so badass.
Yeah, medicinal chemistry with, methodology development is another one that I did, my postdoc, but also mostly it's total synthesis and medicinal and pharmaceutical chemistry was pretty much the scope of my PhD thesis.
Wow.
And then, so start off, I'm originally from North Carolina, and then I did my bachelor's, and I got a Bachelor of Science in chemistry. And after that, I pursued directly going to grad school. I thought about going to the military, but I went to grad school in chemistry with the goal of so my whole goal since I was 12 was to somehow get into medicinal chemistry, pharmaceutical chemistry, and cancer treatment.
Wow.
Yeah, so when I was...
Wanted to be a professional skateboarder.
When I was a young kid, I lost one of my parents to an untreatable disease.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And then ever since then, that was sort of like my dream to, treat the disease. And so I went and studied chemistry. I started off in high school doing all the advanced classes. And then, after that, I did my bachelor's focusing on organic synthesis. And then I graduated with honors. And then I went to graduate school in total synthesis, medicinal chemistry, which was a huge experience for me. It was like 6.5, 7 years.
Oh, my God.
And the focus primarily was, pharmacy, pharmacology, pharmaceutical chemistry, medicinal chemistry. And the majority, so when I was in grad school, pretty much everybody that I had worked with, their goal was to go into pharma. I mean, if you have like an advanced degree from a well-renowned university and you're successful as a graduate student, pharma hires those people, and they're really, really good jobs. So a lot of people, everyone in my circle in grad school was for the most part going to pharma. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do because, as we can talk about later, there's, pharma, it's a business, and they have to not necessarily sell a product, but they are more interested in production and the actual results, making sure that it's a viable product. Whereas in the university does a lot of work in terms of the things that pharmacy just doesn't have the time to do, that are sort of better, questioning conventional wisdoms and knowledge and experiments of that kind. So then after that, I went to Germany for a postdoc, also in medicinal chemistry, and I did a lot more research on sort of just continuing what I had done in my thesis. Mm-hmm. And then I had gotten a call direct from pharma for a direct hire, and this was for an FDA-approved company in Germany. And so since I was there and wasn't sure what I wanted to do, I just took the job. And so then that's how I got into pharma and into drug development. And I was doing that over there for, again, it was an FDA-approved, it wasn't Germany, but it was an FDA-approved lab. I was talking to either clients in the U.S. or FDA audits, FDA regulations on a daily, weekly basis. So,
okay.
But
wow.
It wasn't, I was working abroad. And then I basically worked until my work visa ran out, and it wasn't renewed. For bureaucratic technical reasons. I didn't do anything wrong or anything like that. It's just for whatever reason, one of the big misunderstandings in Germany is that, people see, depending on what political sort of side of the fence you're on in America, they see it as some swarm form of socialism, where like people on the right are going to be like it's an example of broken socialism, and people on the left are going to be like, no, it's an example of good socialism. But in reality, Germany is much different. It's much more conservative, I think, in a lot of areas that people probably wouldn't recognize, such as foreigners and letting foreigners live in the country. It's incredibly difficult there, much more difficult there than it is here, I would say, although I'm not an expert on policy. And so it just so happened I thought I was going to get my visa renewed, and they didn't renew it for, I think it had something to do with my salary and my degree, that I didn't fit like the appropriate residency permit. So that's basically what happened. And so I came back here.
Is that like kind of like, I think is it Sweden or Switzerland, where it's like, if you want to gain citizenship there, you have to have a career or a skill or trade that can contribute to society like they have to have a need for you. So it's primarily like lawyers, doctors, surgeons, stuff like that. Like,
I wouldn't know about that one.
I was wondering if it's like kind of similar to like that kind of aspect, where it's like oh, like, yeah, you're a pharmaceutical like drug creation
developer.
I thought you were gonna say drug dealer. I was like, oh
no, I didn't know really how to word it, but like it maybe that's what I'm trying to put together. It's like yeah, you were doing good, yeah, you had a great like career, you had a great position, and you were contributing, but it just wasn't enough at that point in time to justify renewing your visa to stay there.
Of course they have like the open borders now in the EU, so those people can go wherever they want. And then they have like sanctioned refugees that certain countries like Germany or Sweden, for example, they have to take pretty much. I mean, I guess they don't have to, but they pretty much have to. But in terms of foreigners that are not Europeans, such as myself, it's kind of you're fit into the way they do it is that they try to sell you to the government as this person can do this to stay here legally. Mm-hmm. So since I had a PhD in medicinal chemistry and pharmacy, I got what's called the Blaue Karte, which is basically like a visiting scientist. And in order to get this, you have to be working in the industry, and it just comes down to how much money that you make or that you're offered with respect to your degree. Mm-hmm. But they're not like an open-ended type contract. There's always a limit, and so this will always be reevaluated for the most part when you go to renew it.
Okay.
And so that's where these things come back in, because you're constantly renewing this thing. And I never personally met anybody that, barring people that had married a German citizen or had a kid that got the, unending sort of citizenship. But it's definitely a possibility. It definitely could happen. I'm just saying it's very difficult,
So just get married. Got it. Get married, pop out a Rugrat.
Yeah.
Ta-da!
Well, I mean, even in the U.S., if someone stays for a certain amount of time, I knew plenty of people in the university that were from India or from China, and if they stayed in the U.S. for like 6-7 years, they could file an application for some sort of citizenship, and they were very hopeful that they were going to get something. Okay. But it's just different over there. So
yeah,
it's very difficult, very, very difficult for, I would say, foreigners to get, not to come, because I was able to go on my PhD as like visiting scientist, but to get like citizenship and stay and to work, it's really, really tricky. So.
Wow.
So now your degree in, forgive me if I get this wrong, your degree is in medicinal chemistry, correct? Or
so on my PhD, it's Department of Chemistry and Biology, chemistry.
Chemistry, but your focus is in?
My focus of my PhD was on medicinal chemistry, as well as total synthesis. Total synthesis is basically a word that people use in academia to describe somebody making very, very complex molecules, from scratch, pretty much.
Whoa.
So that was the degree. So synthetic organic chemistry, total synthesis, as well as medicinal chemistry. That was the focus. And then it just so happened that, my PhD studies the pharmacology aspect. So the pharmacy aspect of it took off so well that most of the thesis was just on pharmacy, drug development. And then
So you have worked on mostly developing medicinal pharmaceutical drugs, correct?
The science behind it, right?
The science behind it.
Not
Yeah.
actually producing like the pill or anything, but the science that goes into.
So when I was in pharma, producing pills every day.
Okay.
But in the university, it was the science behind it.
Okay.
How people, I guess. So we say in chemistry, sort of like testing conventional wisdoms or like drug design procedures, because people in that industry, they have a standard operating procedure for everything.
Mhm.
And even if it works, if it's very flawed, they still follow that SOP, this standard operating procedure. And so in the university, one of the main things I did was, even if something is for the most part, functional, like good enough to where it pays the bills, we went through and just sort of analyzed and broke down everything to see if we could improve the process. And so that's medicinal chemistry. And that part of my thesis really took off, and so the majority of it was on that sort of drug design, questioning the paradigms of drug design, things of that nature, because there are so many things that people do that work and they don't really understand why. They just do it because it works. And so a lot of what they do in science is that they go through and examine it further, which is what I did. Now in Germany, most of that, what I was doing in my postdoc, was a bit more of actually making the molecules, like in the bench doing total synthesis. And then pharma was all pushing out drugs, making drugs, quality control, managing the labs. It's a definite business that runs flawlessly. It runs really well. And things are planned years, months in advance, and every second of everybody's day is pretty much planned out in advance, in terms of how they work. People just don't willy-nilly walk in the lab and they're like, oh, I have an idea. Those types of things take meetings and proposals, and at least in my experience. Now, maybe there's a different lab in Silicon Valley or Boston where they have some dude that his job is to come in and just try random ideas out. But my experience in pharma, everything is kind of very well regimented. There isn't a lot of like careless experimenting like you would see in the university, and you're just making things based on a well-known, well-researched formula.
So take me through like developing a pharmaceutical. Like you just said, it's not just somebody walks in one day and says, I'm going to develop this. What is the process of when somebody says, we need to make a medicine to help cure or make this a more manageable, exactly. Or who has that idea, and then what steps does it take until it is a final product for a consumer?
Right. Well, there's definitely a lot of steps to it. It's definitely something that I've always felt was highly misunderstood in the general population.
Okay.
I've always felt that it was very, very sort of, one time I was in Germany and I told people what I did, and they were like, oh, so you work for this, you work for the devil. And I was like, what? I mean, there's just a lot of misunderstanding about it. And developing a drug, I would say there's two aspects to it. So there's research and discovery. There is developing something that's not been done before, or not exactly the way that you're doing it, R&D, research. And then there is, so still in the business of drug development, is producing the drugs, packaging them, and getting the appropriate type of like tablet size or however you're going to ship it, that produced on a very regular sort of basis in terms of feed the demand. And so you still have, I don't know if you all have taken drugs today, but you still have things like vitamins that the recipe is well known, or allergy medication. All these things, there's no discovery involved really, but these drugs still have to be produced. And they still have, even though they're produced on a known formula, there is a ton of quality control and testing that goes into that, which really adds to the overhead of the company, the price.
Okay.
And it's just something that people have no idea. But discovery was a lot of times, so just start with actual true R&D, a lot of these sort of rabbit holes come from biology. Somebody will identify a receptor that could be potentially, if we're talking about small molecules, somebody will identify a receptor that could be potentially blocked in cells that are overproducing or cells that are considered cancerous.
Okay.
And that is, for the most part, how a lot of those medications work even today. We're talking about small molecules. If you don't know what a small molecule is, I'm sure people have seen photos of caffeine or meth. I mean, everyone's seen a small molecule. But
I've seen a lot of coronavirus.
Yeah.
On the internet
Well,
right now.
it's basically what it is that, you know, this current solution, and there are other things going on today in gene therapy, but the current solution in a lot of drugs, particularly like HIV drugs that have come out, or lots of other diseases that people face, is biology will identify a receptor that looks like it could be easily, you could be accessed with a small molecule, and then that sort of these biologists will release the structure. They'll either publish it in like a really high profile journal, or it'll be in the actual pharmaceutical company, and then it's up to the medicinal chemist to design a small molecule that binds into this pocket.
Okay.
So have any of y'all heard the word binding pocket before, or anything like that?
Yes. But if you would like to define it, that would be
Right.
I've heard the term hot pocket before.
Well, a lot of it. So if you're talking about, again, you're talking about like novel medicines. You're not talking about somebody's insulin, or you're not talking about, allergy stuff or Benadryl. You're talking about like a novel treatment to something like HIV or cancer. There are still people coming out with novel cancer treatments, or breast cancer is another big one. You typically will start from the crystal structure that's released, which the whole thing is that I was thinking about how to explain this to people, and I'm not trying to sound like pedantic or whatever, but people that maybe not have a strong science background. You have to think of cancers that a lot of times either a cell is signaled too much, or some sort of wiring within the actual genetic makeup, or so DNA of the cell. Although I'm not a biologist, but something causes this to be overproduced or over-triggered, and that's how you get cancerous cells.
And they
Just
form
to
the
put
tumors
it
then,
put it
correct?
in a nutshell. Yeah, well, I mean, when you have cells overproduce, I mean, cells communicate with each other with small molecules, so then you have a lot more in your system that are being shot around, and that can cause a lot of damage to a living biological system like a person. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can get a tumor or cancerous cells, but they, for the most part, stem from a cell that is being overproduced.
Okay.
Right?
okay.
And for the most part. And that's really summarizing a lot of stuff. And so the goal of a chemist, so the biologist can isolate in the crystal structure of the cell what area of this cell could be blocked so that it no longer reproduces. And a lot of times you get like protein kinase inhibitors where, the cell works when you signal something in the cell. It's so complex. It's just beautiful. I mean, what happens is, you get like an outside response, or you get something internally from the cell. And then, one protein will go here, and then two enzyme there, and a protein there, and then blah, 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 blah.
And so that's how cells are made.
Basically the process I was describing was, I guess, like communication, or how cells work, how actions are carried out.
Okay.
Okay.
It's so how they do it is they have a system of where they will activate something, and that activates something else, that activates something else, that activates something else.
So it's a chain reaction.
For the most part, I guess. And which means there's a lot of, there's a lot of ways to intervene.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, the biologist, earlier I said biology because it's a word that we use sometimes when we talk about, biology, but the biologist or the biochemist, they will, find crystal or things that could be vulnerable that you could block it and shut down. So when people talk about binding pockets or blocking stuff, in general, that there are many different ways you can put something in a binding pocket that accelerates it. That's like an agonist. You can also put something where it inhibits it, and there's many different ways you can mess with binding pockets. But in general, when it comes to shutting down cellular growth or what could be tumorous growth, people are looking at inhibiting that pathway, shutting it down, blocking it. But medicinal chemists can also activate something with a small molecule in a binding pocket. I mean, there's different ways to go about it, but in general, when it comes to cancer or like pharma, nowadays, that's what they do. And if you're just talking about cancer, and just to put it in not layman's terms, but in general's terms,
No, dude, put it in layman's terms.
you have to understand, when people talk about prices of drugs and the type of money that people in pharma make, you have to understand the problem is that you basically have, let's say you're in a city and there's school buses. They don't really do that much anymore, and children are going home. And for whatever reason, a school bus, just, who knows, you don't know, right? It just makes the wrong turn. And when it makes that wrong turn, it causes other school buses to make the wrong turn. And then you have no one's going where they're supposed to. You have a situation that's out of control. And you need to stop this bus, but you don't necessarily, you have to do it with finesse. You can't just like shoot out a tire or something, because the problem is that cells, you have to be really sensitive about it. It's like, talking to a wife or a boyfriend if you suspect they're cheating. You can't just be like, bitch, did you go out last night? I mean, you have to be very, you don't want to come off as too judgmental. So cells, you have to be very sensitive, because the thing is that, molecules you make this process called metabolize. So if somebody ingests a tablet or gets the IV, that drug could be changed just from our own physiology, our own biology, so that the drug that actually is in the system isn't the drug that you made. You can have problems where that's a big problem. Another problem is that cells, so there's sort of this like greasy lipid membrane, and so in order for the small molecule or the potential therapeutic is what they're called, in order for that to get into the cell, it has to have a right mixture of water soluble and also greasiness, or else it won't penetrate the cell membrane. So these are all things that have to be worked out by a chemist, medicinal chemist, in association with biologists, obviously. And so you're looking at, when I say finesse, you're looking at designing something the size of a marble, right, that could stop a school bus and stop specifically what's going wrong with the bus. Just if there's like a hole or something as you plug or whatever, that's kind of like what you're referring to. You're not referring to like, okay, let's just shoot at the tire with a gun and stop the bus, because you have to stop that action, but you can't go in with a sledgehammer.
You have to stop.
That's
it
a
safely.
great analogy, right?
Yeah.
That's really well done.
So that's done. So that's discovery. And so what will happen is that, chemists, I don't do it anymore, but one of the things I used to do was, every day, it was like a passion for me was, how can you typically have some sort of molecule you start out with, and then you go and you improve it from there. And so drug discovery is that what you would do is that, you're not going to test your initial drugs on the actual cell. The biologist will give you sort of, they call them the protein domains. So this is the active part of the protein that's active. And so you can get that replicated, and you can get that in the lab. And so then the first thing you're doing is that you're trying to design a small molecule that can just bind with this inhibitor at a very good, with this protein receptor at a very good affinity. Then once you have that, then you start. Then that's where pharmaceutical companies come in, because something going on. No, you're good. Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
No, you're good.
We were trying to fix a problem over here, but we're good. Everything's fine.
Fine. Well, I guess this is a long story, but the thing is that this is a really long process, and a lot of people don't understand. I'm not trying to defend the pharmaceutical industry, but I don't think people really understand how complex and difficult this is.
No,
so
for sure.
Once you have the inhibitor, and you have doing testing what's called the isolated. A lot of times people are going to work with kinase inhibitors in the HH2, HH3 domains, but you do this test, and then you have to develop the chemistry to a way that this compound can be mass produced. And so that's when somebody comes in that's called a process chemist, and they make a lot of money. And the reason why they make a lot of money is because if I make something in the lab and it takes like 20 steps to make, so they will take, so let's just say a step is like a day of work. Yeah. Let's just say that.
Okay.
Although it could be more, it could be less, but let's just say that one step is a day of work. If it takes me 20 steps, every step I take, I'm losing material. So I'm going to have to start off with like, who knows, 50, 100 grams, and maybe I'll get like 20 milligrams out of it at the end of the day.
Wow.
So what the process chemist does is that, so here's the thing, before you go into preclinical or biological testing, you have to have a lot of the material. So first the discovery starts, somebody will, figure out, this is a molecule, this works. And then at that point, at that point, and a lot of times it's a small team at a pharmaceutical company like Novartis or there's a lot of different companies that sort of lead in drug discovery. There's also a lot of startups that do it. There's a company called Vertex that's starting up doing that. But a lot of times these are teams of like, I don't know, 15, 20, 40 people. And they do that. And then after that...
Now, these 15, 20 people all have PhDs, correct?
It's hard to say. Well, definitely a lot of ideally yes, but it's not always like that. There are definitely master students in there, but in the drug discovery phase, a lot of those people have PhDs. I mean, those people are really. It's not 100% true. I want to say that, but they do have a specialty in making these, potential therapeutics, and it takes a lot of training to do that.
Yeah,
You can't just graduate high school and learn how to do that, because you're talking about making your own decisions. You're talking about problem solving, and those are skills that you pretty much learn in grad school or whatnot, or master's program. So you're talking about problem solving. So the discovery is about problem solving and finding this to bind, but the thing is that you have to produce it. So then it goes to a process chemists or large scale chemists, or mostly I would call them process chemists, and their whole job is to take something that's a good process chemist will take something that's like 20 steps and their whole goal is to shorten it to where you get more material. And then at this point you're definitely using industrial type stuff, really like the scale just gets much, much bigger. So you're talking about industry. The only accurate thing I thought about Breaking Bad when it came to chemistry is how they portrayed how they would do large scale chemistry. They would have like huge vats or whatever, and then they would do a sort of reaction that would be funneled in immediately. I mean, you're talking about like very, very large scale. When people in discovery are working, they're working with like liter or 2 liter flask, because they're just trying to get the idea. Once the idea is there, then you have to shorten such process, and you get a lot of material. And then you are doing your biology at the same time, but this time you're actually testing on the cell. And this is where it becomes how much of a need this drug is. But this is where I'm not an expert, but eventually the preclinical trials are going to come in, like mice, rats. Mm-hmm. But before that, you're going to have a lot of. So before that, you have a lot of research going into just getting a lot of material in this, and then you have to develop it into some sort of delivery system. And a lot of times it's a tablet. It's really easy to market tablets. People just see something, put it in cereal, they eat it. It's really hard to market stuff with an IV. So a lot of pharmaceutical companies will put a lot of money into getting a tablet because that's what people are comfortable with. People take tablets every day. I'm sure one of y'all took a couple tablets today.
Yep, I did.
And so that's what you want to do. And that, again, is a whole nother, that's engineering. It's a whole nother field. So you have the discovery process, and then for the most part, you want to get a tablet, some sort of delivery. It could be an IV. And to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure the preferred way to start preclinical trials, but a lot of them do start with tablets, but yeah. And then you have your, once you get that, you have your preclinical trials where you're testing your drugs on rats, and these are very extensive, and this is where the FDA comes in, and everything has to be filed in a certain way. So this is where it's sort of out of my hands. I'm just familiar with this because I was in the industry, but this is not what I'm doing. And then when you start testing, so then you have that, and if you pass that, then you go into the clinical trials, which is, your FDA clinical trials. And I was talking to him about this earlier. So when I was studying this, I had a professor mention things like, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but for the most part, prisoners and volunteers were used for the first stage of the clinical trials. Wow. And they're the volunteers. And I think the main thing that they're trying to do is that you have to understand, to get back on topic, you're talking about drug discovery, you're talking about saving lives or treating lives, which is the whole reason why I went into chemistry. And I do think a lot of the people working on these drugs, they share the same goal. They're not doing it to make money. Like all of my colleagues in grad school and all of my colleagues in Germany, they definitely shared the goal of contributing something that's going to save lives. I was working on anti-cancer treatments in Germany in the FDA, and I was proud. I liked it. It was like, this is what I wanted to do since I was a kid, and I liked doing it. And so I guess you have to understand that they want to do this, but they also don't want to fail, because you're already talking about discovery, you're talking about process chemistry, and you're talking about making a tablet. another thing I didn't even mention was quality control and stability studies, because how stable is the tablet? Is it going to just crumble to pieces? Is it going to degrade to something that's very, very dangerous? These are all things that have to be figured out. If something sits on the shelf for 3 months, is it going to turn into something very dangerous? These are things that have to be figured out. So you get to that. So a lot of times pharmaceutical companies are not trying to push things in that will be dangerous. They're trying to push things in that, based on historical testing or other things, they think has a good likelihood of passing. But yeah, the clinical trials start off the first stage, and I don't want to claim, but my professor in pharmacy when I was in grad school said that these were, for the most part, volunteers in prison, that they got some sort of sentence for good favor. I don't know. But I don't necessarily think that they're dying. It's just that you have to start it off. And then after that, you go to another stage where it's like emergency treatments, where people that are in dire need of something. So when you hear about things like, oh, it's still in clinical trials or testing trials, some people can become valid for this program if they are, going to die of this disease. And then it goes on to basically a placebo effect. Is this drug actually doing what it's going to do, or is it a placebo? And if it passes all of that, then the FDA can approve it and you can sell it. Now, here's the problem, if we're getting to pharmacy and money, is that companies, it's privately funded. There are like NIH funded postdocs. I had a friend that was an NIH postdoc working for Pfizer.
For our viewers that don't know what exactly that stands for, could you explain that?
NIH?
Yeah.
National Institute of Health.
Okay.
So they will fund, they will give funding in the form of postdocs or in the form of research grants to pharmaceutical companies. That happens. A friend of mine was a NIH postdoc and works for a company that they do get grants and things like that, but not all the time, I believe. But the NIH does, but for the most part, these are private businesses. And so they, at the end of the day, they have to make their profit, or they're going to, it's a business, right? Yeah. So that whole process, they're hoping that it's going to pass. Odds are that it's going to fail. So that whole thing, they have at least 5 or 6 other projects in parallel. So all that funding for the drug that's going to pass, you imagine 6-7-fold at least. It could be more, it could be less.
It has to compensate for all the other projects that did not pass and all the expenses and resources.
Right, and believe me, so when I was doing my PhD in pharmacy, my treasure trove or whatever was of the failed projects, because that, all this stuff, it's not government property, it's private businesses, and it's all confidential. But when something fails, they just kind of dump it. And that's where they just dump it in crappy journals. At least they get a publication out of it. It goes to a good NIH grant, I guess. But that's where you get the failed projects. To me, were the most interesting, because that's where you really see how the pharmaceutical company works, and you just see how much effort and manpower they put into this one thing that failed, and they're not going to get any money for it.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not trying to come on the show to defend Big Pharma or whatever. But I do think that there's a lot of misunderstandings. My sister, for example, I love my sister, but
me, for example,
she
my opinion already.
She would say things like, if insulin costs this much per pill, then why do they charge 10, 20 times more? And maybe that's not a good example, because, there's no development in insulin, but companies have to have that overhead in order to exist, to pay for the medicines or the inhibitors that don't get through the trials.
You're not paying for the materials, you're paying for the backlog of work, you're paying for the development, you're paying for
a lot of the development,
the people that made it.
You're paying for the development. And again, I don't know that there's a lot of ways there could be government funding in here in the form of NIH grants or NIH postdocs that maybe I'm not aware of. But this is capital, for the most part, startup capital from a company, and they have to, in order to get a drug on the market, they will always have, they won't, what's the expression? God, I'm coming back from Germany, I've forgotten so many expressions. Don't put all your money on one horse or whatever, isn't that the American?
Don't put all your eggs in one basket?
Yeah, that's it. Sorry.
No,
Sorry. I've forgotten this. So they definitely do that. And, I've talked to old colleagues of mine. It's like, okay, so you're rewarding them for failure, and you're not. No one really knows what's going to happen. So you have to, if you want to stay afloat as a business and you want to get a drug on the market, you have to test many different things. And so that's one way where the prices come in, again, in a nutshell. And then there's a completely other thing, which is called sort of just like batch production, drug development, and that's when it's on the market. So like vitamins, prenatal vitamins are really common, or iron supplements, really common. You can't just make it once it's been developed. You cannot make it and then just ship it to people. You have to test all the raw ingredients that go into this thing to make sure that they're actually the way they say. You have to, once you make it, you have to test it actually that it does. And then before you can put it on the market, talking about allergies or birth control or whatever, you have to test it for its stability for a minimum of 6 months before you can put it on its market, and then continue to test it for its stability, that batch.
Wow.
So these are all things that, when people say if it costs $2 to make Benadryl, why are they charging 15? Well, I mean, the pharmaceutical company, they're not just making it, thank God, they're not just making it and shipping it to the pharmacist. They're making it and they're testing it to make sure it does what it's supposed to do. Those are FDA regulated. They have to do that. They're testing to make sure it's stable enough to sit, at 20 degrees Celsius, 25 degrees Celsius, at regular humidity for 2-3 years, however long it sits there. All these things have to be tested, and things do go wrong. One of my side projects in the pharma is that I was sort of a project lead for this, aspect, stability studies, quality control. And when something goes wrong in that regard, like let's say you put something and for whatever reason the batch wasn't good and it's degrading or
Degrading.
Yeah, sorry.
Degenerating.
Yeah. I was
disintegrating.
I was mixing in the German word and English word, but when that happens and it's already on the pharmacy, the problem is that if you do a recall is pointless at that point because it's been on the pharmacy shelf, so it's in every other little kitchen, and no one's going to know that this batch of iron supplements are bad. So these are all things that require a lot of knowledge in advance and a lot of planning to make sure that it doesn't happen. Because that would be a disaster. The entire time I was working there, we almost had one of those once, a recall, and the CEO was talking about having to sell a company. So, I mean, these things are really expensive. It's a really expensive sort of business, and people do take a ton of precautions, even when it comes to iron supplements, So that's just...
Can I ask a real quick question?
Yeah, go for it.
So, real quick, back to how you said there's constant testing on some of the same, the same drugs that are. Sorry. So, is there ever a point, would it be crazy to think that like sometimes maybe a specific type of ingredient might have a shortage in the way that you guys can obtain it or make it, and they sort of slightly reformulate it to keep it to still be able to make that type of drug?
So I think, so to understand your question, what you're saying is that if you know that, it's your product is going to break down in a certain way, can you make it in a way to where it wouldn't break down or use a different ingredient? Is that what you're saying?
Well, like if times change and I don't know, maybe they're not manufacturing a specific, ingredient that goes into that the same way. Obviously you would try to sort of replicate that. If you can't have one ingredient, you're going to break down a different ingredient to make that ingredient. Right. But is there ever a time where maybe you can't get that ingredient the way that it was before, and that's why they continuously test, because that's not the main reason, I guess, but is that ever part of it as well?
No, they continually test. So these are FDA regulations. They continually test because it's always a gamble. So if you have a certain recipe and it works all the time, it's always a gamble in terms of how that batch is made in the pharmacy in the plant,
because it's such a small margin.
It depends on like maybe what the weather was that day. You're talking about tablets, and if it happens or what however drug delivery system, but so they're FDA regulated regardless to test that again for a minimum of 6 months at 40 degrees Celsius, which is like activated at high, so room temperature is like 20, 25. And once it passes that, then they can ship it out to the market. But then they must depending on the shelf life, like if the shelf life is 3 years, then they have to keep it and test it for 3. Just because there is no guarantee that something in the formulation. So formulation is the word formulation development is how they put all the ingredients together to get the certain tablet. So there are a lot of additives that have nothing to do with the biology of it that
Right.
are
Just binding agents, right?
yeah, they're made for the tablet.
Yep.
There's a lot of additives, and so the formulation development is how you put this in. But to get to your question, they will when they're at that point where they're making iron supplements or whatever. I mean, there's going to be a history that this is going to work, but they still have to test it because you can't guarantee without any doubt that this is going to go the same way every time and it's going to be perfect. And in a lot of cases you could, but since you're talking about people like you and me that are eating these pills, the FDA makes them keep a sort of a close eye on it. And
Okay.
so that's why they're, and if they had something, like if something wasn't working in formulation development, research and development, and they wanted to try something out, that would also have to be continuously tested.
Gotcha.
It's not like somebody gets a solution, we're like, okay, we're done, guys. I mean, you have to keep an eye on things.
It's kind of a
long
constant
time.
build a little bit.
So even like for something like Benadryl, something that simple, Benadryl is still being tested.
Right. So if you go to the pharmacy and you see something on the pharmacy shelf, that batch was produced. You can look where it was produced. It should be there. And then a representative sample from that batch was stored in what you would call a stability chamber, which is like highly elevated temperature, like I said, 40 degrees Celsius, and humidity, which is like 75% humidity. So, and if it can survive that for 6 months, that's what you call accelerated testing.
Okay.
Then a lot of places will release that batch. Now, there are certain cases where a batch can be released to the the public market before it goes through the stability testing, accelerated testing. But in most cases, it kind of needs that. And then it's continually tested for the shelf life. So if you go to any pharmacy and you see Benadryl or, I mean, again, the vitamins are a big one. Narcotics are also a big one. Those are like a lot. I mean, those are drugs. One of main things where commonly, like, not everybody's going to the pharmacy to get cancer drugs, right?
Yeah.
But people are going to the pharmacy to get things like Advil or narcotics are super common and over-prescribed. Vitamins, like, we're all dudes here, but women are really into. There's prenatal vitamins. There's iron supplements. Most women, if any of y'all have girlfriends, ask her if she takes iron supplements or any type of supplements.
I know a lot of women that take iron supplements. Yeah.
So those are the big ones, and they have to be tested for their stability as long as the shelf life. So from that batch, so the batch is going to
The
be
medicine, not the women.
the batch itself.
Medicine has to be tested for stability.
The batch, you're talking about one batch, depending on the type of site. You're talking about 1 million pills. So you have to randomly get, I'm saying a lot. People always tell you, it's like, hey, this is a tangent, But when you go and you're on a microphone, like, trying to say, and I've been saying like every other word. It's hard.
Dude, it's fine.
Dude,
But-
Don't even worry about it.
But, right. So it will be tested, but in order to get it out, there is this thing called accelerated testing, which is high temperature, high humidity. But it will be tested for its shelf life. And again, this is all overhead. This is all prices. And we're talking about drugs. This is not discovery. These are drugs that have been around forever. But because of the FDA, which, I mean, thank God, it's good that somebody can't.
cares.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about, like, if some company, were the devil and they were trying to make a profit, so they just, like, squirted out like a horrible product and were like, whatever, good luck to the patients. Thanks to the FDA,
That can't happen.
can't happen because they're going to be testing it before it gets out. They should be, at least.
Yeah.
And again, we're not even talking about stability. I'm sorry, we're not even talking about drug development. We're talking about drugs that have been around for a while. But again, it's to the cost that people, I guess, just aren't aware of.
No.
Sorry.
Why do we always ask questions at the same time? It's like
I don't know.
it's like we have a telepathy.
We're connected. Let me ask mine.
Yeah,
first,
go first. I have mine right
because
now.
I think I might have this wrapped up here. So to fully encompass everything that you just told us and what you've described to us, because I was actually someone that at the same time was like, oh, why is big pharma like so expensive? So for you, like when you're saying you have all these drugs and you're like you said, insulin. It costs $2 to produce the pill, quote unquote. Why are they charging 15? When you're the consumer and you're buying that overpriced drug, you essentially have to look at it as you're not getting gouged on that prescription. You're essentially just investing in the company so that they can make their money back on their failed projects, but by getting that money for their failed projects, they can still stay in business and continue to research and develop new and better drugs then.
Well, you're also paying for your safety as well because it has to be FDA approved.
That as well.
You're paying for development.
That's one part.
Or it wouldn't exist.
So the development, so like I said, best of my knowledge, it's mostly a privately funded business. Companies, they do get help from the NIH and things like that, but they're private businesses. And again, for them to get something through discovery, so the entire process that I explained has to be done in duplicate, triplicate, whatever, because if they're going to invest that much, they have to get something on the market.
Yeah.
So they duplicate it. Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
But another thing is what he was saying is that, so I don't know if it was my sister or an old flame of mine. I don't remember who. It's probably bad. I'm confusing it too.
No, it's okay.
But
we're not gonna think
somebody was like, hey, you should know about this. It was this Facebook thing. Like, this costs $2 per pill, and pharmacy is charging 20 or something. Like, to me, that makes complete sense. To me, I was like, oh, it's cheap actually, because
that's a great deal. You
because
should go to that pharmacy.
so the company. Not only does the company have to make up for failed drugs, and the thing is that you're not rewarding them for failure. It's not like the stock market crash. They have to go through that process in order to survive because of the FDA regulations. Mm-hmm. There's also all these hidden costs that people have no idea. Like that drug that you're getting in the pharmacy, pharmacist, is in some lab somewhere in some stability chamber, the same batch being tested to make sure that it's still stable up to its shelf life.
That needs funding.
And that needs, well, you have to pay for it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it requires funding.
The FDA doesn't pay for it. The FDA just says you have to do this. And so you have to have, you're talking about entire warehouses that their whole job is to make sure these things are stable. And that's just stability. There's also quality control. Like, that's another industry. Quality control is like when you're testing your drugs for their stability to make sure that all of your processes are by FDA standards. Because if the FDA makes an audit, finds out that it's not by FDA standards, then you lose that certificate and you're going to lose a lot of business. So I think it's hidden cost, which is the point that you brought up. People don't understand. And it's also in terms of the R&D for the company, they have to make up for that somehow. Now, I don't know the specifics. If something is in dire need, are they racking up the cost more because they know people are going to pay for it? I mean, I think that's how people see pharma, that this person needs this HIV medicine, so we're just going to make it more because they're going to pay for it or they're going to die. It's not how I see it. I just see it as an expensive industry because of
how much
everything that's required. Yeah. Now, are there people that have done that in the past and could very well be? I would hope that's not the case, but
now let me ask you: when people say the phrase or term, whatever you want to call it, big pharma, what's your immediate reaction, if you don't mind me asking? Like, say you're at a bar somewhere, or you're in a grocery store, and just overhear somebody's going, "Oh, well, because of big pharma." Is it just kind of like you roll your eyes and you're like, "Okay, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about."
When someone says big pharma, I initially think that they're referring to something in R&D. They're referring to something either in like anti-cancer drug development, or somebody that is working on, like, breast cancer is a really hot topic right now. HIV is still a really, really hot topic. So when someone says the word big pharma, I immediately think that they're talking about, referring to actual research and development for generating pharmaceutical therapeutics. Now, when someone is using that in a sort of derogatory way, like
that's kind of more so what
big
I mean.
pharma is the devil. I just think that people believe what they hear and people believe what they see, and I just think that it's someone that just doesn't really understand the picture, the bigger picture. But I mean, I honestly, at the end of the day, you look at the tobacco industries and the fuel industries, I mean, what sole purpose of their idea is to benefit society? I mean, they've got a little market on society that people need, although they don't really need it, and they're profiting. At the end of the day, pharmaceutical companies have designed and developed drugs that have saved millions of lives. Like, it's just, I mean, they've done a lot of good work.
Yeah.
Those guys, I mean, doctors get heralded, that's fine. I appreciate doctors too, but medicinal chemists, people in pharma are developing medications that affect people all over the world, and those guys, they do it because that's what they want. They want to help people, and a lot of them went to college to go into pre-med, and they discovered that if they make a drug, they could have the chance of benefiting more, saving more lives. And a lot of them are like, well, okay, I'll go to grad school and I'll be a biochemist or a medicinal chemist. And so I think at the end of the day, it's misunderstood when someone says it in a derogatory context. When someone like a previous colleague of me talks about big pharma, I think immediately they're talking about R&D discovery, because there are different types of pharma, like all the quality control, stability studying, the formulation development that we were talking about, to the point that you brought up to get the pills. That's also pharma, but they're not going through the R&D of the small molecules to make a drug, but it's also pharma. When someone says big pharma, that's what I think.
So
but
to piggyback off his question, I'm going to kind of make this really layman's terms. So like he was saying, when you hear someone say big pharma, just your general reaction, if you're like you said, at the bar, you're sitting there minding your own business, someone's like, oh, big pharma again. Are you just like, are you like, it's not even worth it? Or is there like some kind of drive where you're like, hey, so can I talk to you about big pharma real quick? Because I feel like you're very misinformed. Like, which route do you go, or do you kind of just like somewhere in the middle?
No, I've never gotten confrontational. It's just, we're talking about, when I went into this, I never realized that I was going to be in such a controversial field as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
I was doing it, like I said, my father had passed away from an untreatable disease, and I was just motivated by that my entire life, and that was what I wanted to do. And as an adult, I definitely would get a lot of people that just hated the industry for whatever reason. And I mean, I'm not gonna my reaction is that they're just misinformed.
And you just chalk it up to that.
Yeah. And then it's just yeah.
I mean, some of those people, it doesn't matter what you say, even as somebody who's very well ingrained in the field, you have a PhD in it, no matter what you say, you probably still can't change their mind. I mean, even when it comes to something this complex, I know even when it comes to, I've been in sales for a while, and I'll overhear somebody at, a bar or somewhere, they're talking about how they just got done buying a car or something, like, oh, this guy was trying to bend me over the barrel doing this, and I'm like, no, the guy was just trying to figure out what color car you wanted, man. So it's one of those things where I hear it in my mind, and I know that, and I have had those conversations where I tell people that I'm in sales, and they're like, oh, so let me tell you a story about last time I bought this car, or whenever I went to buy my grill from this whatever place, and I'll explain them to everything, and no matter what I say, I'm not changing their mind. And you get to that point in the conversation where you're like, all right, we're done here. Like,
have a great night.
Yeah.
It was nice talking to you.
Yeah, what they believe is what they believe, and there's no changing that. And it's unfortunate.
That's true. And again, not to have a disclaimer of any kind, but I'm not trying to say that just because they do things for the greater good that they have, the blanche carte, or they have this sort of tabula rasa to overcharge people when they're in need. Mm-hmm. Not trying to defend that at all. So I have talked to many people, many people that have specific cases of somebody that, had fraud investigations for overcharging just because people need it. I'm not trying to support that at all.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think that you should overcharge just because it's a need.
Yeah.
I think that that's where, and again, to me, that's where it becomes more of like a health care related issue as opposed to a big pharma issue, because they still need to meet their overhead. They still make their cost. And when it comes to, particularly living in Europe, about how healthcare is just, it's a mandated tax that everyone pays the same tax, and people don't sweat drugs or anything like that because healthcare covers it. And here, people have to pay out of their pocket, and so they're upset. And I'm certainly not trying to defend anybody that's taking advantage of something that's in need and wants to charge more. That's horrible. I'm just saying that I think in general, it's misunderstood, particularly when people say, "Oh, if this costs $2 to make, why is it 15?" And I'm like, that's actually a good deal, you know? I mean, when you think of how much goes into the research and how much goes into the formulation, development, quality control, stability testing, we haven't even gotten to like, the shipping and all that stuff. Those factories, those factories have to be temperature and humidity controlled. It's just a huge amount of cost. And I just feel like people are misinformed and they're really happy to jump on the bandwagon. Like everyone in pharma is just trying to take advantage of a life-saving medication to overcharge people. I'm happy to, I don't obviously condone anything like that.
No.
But I'm just arguing about the general conception of it.
Yeah. No, well, dude, you've brought so much light tonight. I mean, before I met you a few weeks ago, I knew nothing about pharmaceuticals. I mean,
before I met you tonight, I knew nothing.
I learned so much tonight. I mean, I have a lot of family in the medical field and stuff like that, like nursing and whatnot. Not that that's the same as pharmaceuticals, but it's, I guess I kind of go.
They play a part.
You get what I'm saying. Anyways, like, you blow my mind, and thank you so much for coming on here and explaining all this, because like, I hope this reaches as many people as possible that can finally come to understand what you just explained, because there's so many things in there that you have explained that I would have never thought of. One, two, it's just
I wouldn't have even known how to put it the way he did, even if I did know it. You know what I mean?
School bus and marble.
Dude, that was
the best
analogy
ever.
I've ever heard. That was so good. Like, oh my God.
Thanks for having me. Again, the more we talk about this, the more it's like, like when people say big pharma, again, I'm not in the game anymore. I'm trying to get back into it because I love that job. It's a very rewarding job. My salary, actually, just because we're talking about it, people talk about how they make. So in Germany, I was making 75,000 euros a year. That was my salary.
Like 90 to
yeah,
95,000.
That was my.
dollars?
Am I not allowed to talk about salary? You're giving me this look.
You're good.
That's
No.
your choice.
I'm sorry.
So
my allergies are killing me right now.
It's not like. I mean, it's just how it is. People refer to it as like I refer to it. I mean, if someone goes to school for like 4 years undergrad and then 6 years PhD and then 2 years postdoc, it's like 12. I had 13 years of education. I feel like
holy shit,
that's reasonable salary for someone that was in school for 13 years.
Yeah.
You went to school longer than you originally had to go to school for. Like, Jesus.
But I think, again,
wow.
I just want to make it clear that there is a history of people in pharmacy being accused of using something that's in need to overcharge. And I totally support if people are doing that, companies are doing that, or bureaucrats are doing that, then they should be held accountable for it.
I think that's a really good foot stomp for you, for sure.
Yeah, my take on it, though, is that the ultimate cost, again, I feel like a lot of this cost stuff should go to a healthcare type discussion, but the ultimate cost, there's just so many hidden costs, as you were saying, and also the R&D that people aren't even aware of. People have no idea how many projects failed, and the company had to pay for all that. And so at the end of the day, the company still has to move forward and get capital. So
I feel like the way the typical person thinks about like pharmaceuticals is like the scene from Step Brothers when they're putting on the slideshow about like trying to get investors for everything, and they're like, science, and it's just like it's two guys with like random guys with a white lab coat on and random beakers, and they're like, that's how cancer medicine's made, and it's like, not at all. Like,
oh my God,
not even close. And I see that now, like from speaking with you, someone that literally is in it, like knows the ins and outs of it, knows the math, knows the chemistry. I feel like I was one of those people that was like, oh yeah,
I feel like
science.
I feel like tonight we like just only covered like the tip of the iceberg. So
for
David,
sure.
we would really, really love to have you back sometime. We're kind of running low on time. We're running out of time here today.
Yeah, I'm
but
sorry. I noticed that. It's
No,
like
no,
double
dude. Conversation's flowing. I'm loving this. Like,
thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's my first time in podcast, and y'all
you
were
did
great.
You did great.
Thank you, man.
Thanks
You
so
did
much. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's nice to talk about stuff. Great conversation, you guys. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Like, We would absolutely love to have you back on, talk about some more things. I got questions written down here that definitely want to ask you next time and stuff like that. So thank you again so much for coming on.
Again,
appreciate it.
David, what's his last name?
I didn't say my last name.
Oh,
We're just calling him Doctor. We're just calling him Dr. David today.
Dr. David. You know what I think? Before we go, I just want to throw this out there. If anyone wants to put it out there in the comments, if you think this would be a great idea, I think we should explore the option of drinking with Dr. David. Like getting Dr. David drunk and just asking him about a subject and just seeing what happens. I think that's going to be great. I think that would be a great bit.
I think it would be good too.
I think I would have a fun time with that. We should definitely do that sometime. But we have to wrap up here today. Wanted to give a quick.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Rockmail Industries. Definitely check them out. rockmailink.com. And check them out. They are a professional recording studio, screen printing, embroidery, much more, music lessons, all sorts of stuff. They sponsor us so that way we can bring great content like this to you. And David, thank you again. I can't thank you enough for coming.
You're welcome. Take off for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
See you next time, guys.
See you next week.